Dead by Daylight has the difficult task of performing a balancing act of keeping new content and old content at a similar level. When new content is released, it's the bright and shiny new thing and receives changes for the next handful of months before the next content cycle comes up and behavior focuses on said new content. For this, we'll use Springtrap as the example. The character is no longer the new thing for behavior to focus on. The gradual buildup of bugs has already begun, and seemingly, the dreaded power creep might begin hitting the killer pretty hard. Once a killer is power crept hard enough, in most cases, that killer will be up for a rework. A rework by behavior standards is extremely confusing and sometimes extremely unreliable. At one point, big buffs were considered reworks. Think of the singularities changes that he received in patch 8.1.0, which buffed essentially every aspect of his kit in order to attempt to make him more accessible to new players. It's the same kit, just much more easier to get into than he was off his release. At the same time, the changes to Freddy in patch 8.5.0 were also a rework. Literally every ability of his was given a brand new effect to attempt to modernize it. His snares were transformed from a small, pitiful attempt at a trap into a projectile, while the trap aspect with the snare was transferred to the dream pallets, allowing Freddy to now manually explode these pallets into bits in order to take a health state from any and all asleep survivors caught within its radius. The dream projection can now teleport to incomplete and completed generators, something he could not do beforehand. He can also teleport to asleep survivors that are healing. Literally everything attached to the character was given a massive glow up. These are not the same thing. One was a set of major buffs, and the other was dragging a killer out of 2019 and moving him into 2025. However, for simplicity, we will play by behavior's rules and classify any other changes I mentioned in this video as a rework. If behavior themselves classified it as such, just know that I don't necessarily agree with a lot of behavior's changes being classified like this because it's not really that. When a character becomes a bit weaker in most scenarios, that puts them in line for a rework. Freddy and the Doctor spring to mind for me. However, while these two characters both received reworks that were genuinely fantastic for them and their viability, as well as identity, not every character is that lucky. Sometimes behavior has a swing and a miss that leaves behind a lot of the things that a character needs in order to have the same identity that the character is built around. Let's take a look at the licensed character, the Cannibal, otherwise known as Leatherface. Obviously his power is Bubba's chainsaw. Extremely obvious that this would be the take on the power. It's quite literally an iconic weapon for Bubba. The only weapons more connected to a horror character is Freddy's glove and Jason's machete. The power itself from the way it looks is relatively close. The coloring is slightly off for full clarity, but it's fine. As for Bubba's animations, they are a bit outdated but still show how scared Leatherface is to be where he is. The same can be said for his audio cues as well. The whimpering and squeals fit the character well. This is Leatherface, and he remained Leatherface following his rework. You can go down the list and argue that every killer is fitting the source material that they originally came from in a satisfactory way. The only ones I can't personally speak for are Wesker, Nemesis, Pyramid Head, and Dracula. I know very little about these licenses, but as for all of the movie-based characters, I have personal experiences with every single one of them and can give a thumbs up for them all in terms of adaptation. The Shape, better known as Michael Myers, was released in October of 2016 as the first licensed killer added to the game. It is undeniable that Myers' release was one of, if not the biggest thing in Dead by Daylight in the early days. His power was something that fit into these early days and stayed this way for years and years. Gradually, Myers began to fall down the tier list due to power creep and the game changing more into being focused on looping instead of stealth. Despite being someone who enjoys powers with a lot of moving parts, I was actually a bit of a fan of Myers. It was sometimes nice to just turn your brain off and play what was the equivalent of unseasoned chicken and water. It's been a few months, so just in case anyone's forgot, I want to give you a reminder how Michael worked before his big set of changes. He operated in a tier system. The way Myers would go through these tiers is by stalking survivors. The more he stalked, the more powerful he'd become. The stalking was formatted as stalk points. Once Myers reached the required amount of stalk points, he'd tier up. Tier 1 offered true stealth with the downside of a slower movement speed and no lunge. Tier 2 turned him into a regular killer with a smaller tear radius and slightly faster vaulting speed, and Tier 3 gave him an insta-down and allowed for faster vaulting while increasing his tear radius to the standard 32 meters. The add-ons attached to this iteration were pretty much worthless outside of a small handful. The J. Myers Memorial, Hairbow, Dead Rabbit, Fragrant Tuft of Hair, Judith's Journal, and the Memorial Flower all saw a decent chunk of usage, but paled in comparison to the absolute monster that was the Tombstone piece. How this add-on worked was that once Michael entered Tier 3, he would be able to instantly, with no prerequisites, moor your survivor once they were close enough for him to latch onto at the cost of losing his current Tier 3 and needing to rebuild it. This was simply one of the most overpowered add-ons in Dead by Daylight history. But for a character that was so incredibly weak, some people would argue that it was completely necessary to give him any real fighting chance against survivors who knew what they were doing. After nearly a decade, Myers received his first set of buffs in patch 8.4.0. Behavior adjusted the speed at which he stalked when people were further away, increased his movement speed in Tier 1, made him enter Tier 2 faster, and finally adjusted some of the add-ons. The biggest ones being the Tombstone piece, which had its stalk point requirement doubled from 7.5 to now being 15 stalk points. At the same time, the Fragrant Tuft of Hair had its stalk points doubled from 10 to 20, and the same could be said about the Judas Tombstone, which had its stalk points doubled from 10 to 20 as well. These add-ons were changed for a very obvious reason. They were by far and away the most popular choices for Myers players. With the buffs to Myers stalking, it indirectly made his other add-ons that were focused on faster or longer Tier 3s, specifically the J. Myers Memorial and the Hair Bow, much more appealing choices. Despite how felt the nerfs were, there are no add-ons that Behavior could have created that would have been stronger than just straight up killing someone with very little real counterplay to stop it. So, the Tombstone piece remained as the most dominant add-on in his kit and one of the most hotly debated aspects of the game in the DbD community. This was the state Myers was in prior to his rework. This character made it nearly a year before being addressed once again. While a lot of people still considered Myers as one of the worst killers in the game at this time, personally, I think he'd escaped the bottom 3 stigma that had been attached to him for years and years. Michael was nowhere near a strong killer, but he was also no longer so weak that he needed immediate help. Characters like Skull Merchant, Ghostface, and Trapper all needed to be adjusted much sooner than Michael. However, if you approach from a different angle, that being looking at his kit from just how out of date it was, you'll see that Myers probably did need to be changed once again and very quickly. While he was no longer laughably weak, Myers was a product of a different time when people would hide instead of looping. This was more so the gameplay, hiding from the killer while they would slowly but surely find and hook your teammates until you either finished the generators or you were all sacrificed. While today we have more of a cat and mouse playstyle that cannot suffer killers who do not have any form of proper chasing power. This was what caused Myers to be left in the past. While he could instantly down survivors, the exposed status effect means very little if the killer cannot catch up to the survivor. Well, all of this was addressed on September 23rd, 2025. The Sinister Grace chapter was released. This introduced the Kresu, V, a massive rework to how pallets spawn, as well as the next update to the shape and the main focus of this video. Myers received a full-on, Freddy-style rework that completely changed the way his power worked. Since this is something that we have in current day Dead by Daylight, I will try to be quick with this. Myers' tier system was split in two. Tier 1 became Stalker Mode. This allows you to stalk survivors to reach the new version of Tier 3, which I'll get into here in just a moment. If you do not fully stalk a survivor, which takes around 6 seconds, your stalking will begin to decay until it reaches the 50% mark. It's worth noting that you have a stalking penalty while you are actively moving. Tier 2 became Pursuer Mode, allowing for Myers to lunge further, recover from stuns faster, break pallets quicker, and vault faster, as well as having the same smaller tear radius that he did in the older version of Tier 2, that being 16 meters. Using Stalker Mode and filling your stalk meter will allow for you to activate Evil Within. Evil Within will last for 60 seconds, and once activated, Myers will be able to use the Slaughtering Strike, a dash ability that allows him to cover short distances very quickly. The amount of distance he can travel is changed by how long it is charged and what add-ons he uses. Michael can also use his power to immediately break a pallet or wall. The Slaughtering Strike has a cooldown of 4 seconds whether he hits or misses his target. Myers can now straight up moor your survivor that has done their final hook stage once he enters Tier 3. All jokes and bits aside, this is probably my favorite part of his kit. Behavior found a way to implement this add-on into his base power in a way that isn't frustrating to play against while still having the insta-mori aspect that he had and a lot of people liked. This rework is something that really shows Myers in his element, a killer that gradually builds up his pressure until survivors simply cannot compete anymore. No feelings, no remorse, no mercy. Just an unmoving, unstoppable train that tears through people in mere seconds. Pallets and windows mean nothing because Michael simply does not care about them. He will deal with these obstacles without a second thought, and in the final moments of survivors' time in the trial, they will realize this is evil incarnate, and evil has a dash. Wait, hold on, pause this. This just is not Michael Myers. This is an entirely different character from an entirely different set of movies. I won't use the thematic argument for long because I know a lot of people could not care less, and that's fine. I do understand that DbD is a video game first and an homage to these properties and horror in general second. However, the animations across the board have more in common with Fortnite Michael Myers than they do the actual character. It's just not right. None of it is right. He doesn't move like this. He doesn't do an Apex Legends heirloom inspect. His knife doesn't start glowing. It's just so incredibly weird and out of place to watch all of this. The scene a lot of people will and have pointed to in order to defend the Myers rework is the Bob scene from the first Halloween film. I'm not going to show it to you at risk of getting this video smited by the almighty copyright gods, but it's an iconic scene. The argument goes that he moved incredibly fast in that scene and pinned Bob against the wall before, quite literally pinning him against the wall. However, the thing people like to leave out of that is that Bob was already right next to the wall in a cramped hallway. He was already within touching distance of Michael, not on the other side of a room like people try and argue in favor of. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work for the character. It's clunky, goofy, and unfitting. That isn't all though. On top of the thematic side of the character being shot into the sun, the gameplay is not in much of a better spot. Myers received this rework that changed him from one of the most mediocre, stale, and basic designs in the game to now being a strong, stale, and basic design by 2025 standard. Nothing changed except that he is strong now. Now, this is where I'll offer behavior a bit of credit. Michael is genuinely pretty good after the buffs he received in October. If strength is the main factor in determining the success of a rework, then this was a straight up success, point blank period. If that's all that matters to you, feel free to click off the video now in the most respectful way possible. I just can't argue the strength of the killer. It's really just that simple. People are playing him way more than they did before, so mission accomplished from that aspect as well. And hey, I do get it. I'm not going to pretend that I'm above the fun of man go fast and hit hard. I can put the fun aspect aside though to see the problems that he has, because these problems that he does have can and more than likely will end up seriously damaging his reputation within the community. Myers went from the lower end of the tier list to undeniably at the very least the higher side of average. This character simply does not care about 50-50s. If you've been taking a break from the game at the time of recording, nearly every palette on the map right now is a 50-50. Being able to quickly and effortlessly redirect where the dash is headed with no issue is incredibly strong. It takes the nearly guaranteed hit aspect of Pig's dash and amplifies it tenfold because of the lack of proper warning, the speed at which Michael moves, and most importantly, the insta-down attached to the strike. Pair this with the extremely short cooldown, and the ability can genuinely be spammed over and over. Whether it's used to eat through pallets on the map, which it's very good at doing, or zoning a survivor to the wrong side of the pallet before breaking it, or slugging to snowball a team. There is next to no downtime for this aspect of the power. However, this is where my problems begin. 4 seconds is laughably short for something that has this much agency. Just a reminder that Chucky has much less control, a much louder audio cue, does not have the ability to immediately down, and has to wait 12 seconds to get the dash back. He also has multiple giveaways while he is undetectable, horrible perk synergy, and an incredibly loud warning when he vaults a window or pallet. Myers just has power crept Chucky, who despite all of his changes is still a fairly strong killer. This isn't even all that Michael has. You can pair this with the incredibly forgiving amount of time that Michael needs to stalk a survivor, and you have a power that will almost always be able to be used. Now, despite everything you've heard so far in this video, the strength isn't even the main aspect that bothers me. While I do think that Michael is overtuned in certain areas of his kit, mostly his zoning, I don't inherently mind a strong killer. I'm also okay with powers that are easy to use as well. Not everyone needs to have the same actions per minute required to use them well like Freddy does. Simple killers and strong killers are both extremely good for the game in concept. The issue comes when you begin to mix the two. What makes me dislike the Michael rework is just how soulless it is in the pursuit of making him a strong killer. This character has nothing about him that is unique. There is nothing about him that makes him more fun or creative than the killers he is closest to, that being Chucky and Pig. Both of which share a similar type of dash, but have their own unique spin on a character as a whole. RBTs in the crouch for Pig, and the third-person camera as well as Scamper for Chucky. Yes, Michael has Pursuer mode, but quite frankly, you will use this very rarely because you get the dash back so quickly that Pursuer is just pointless. What Michael has over the other two is that he is just the strongest of the three with very little to make him an interesting character. Moving on though, I want to look at one add-on that I think sums up this rework better than anything I could say. The Hairbrush. This is one of the silliest add-ons in Dead by Daylight currently. What this does is allow Michael to kick one pallet with a massive 50% boost while he is in Evil Incarnate. At this point, you probably see that this is just an add-on created with the intention of being strong. Nothing interesting, nothing with an ounce of skill expression, nothing that encourages healthy counterplay. It's just strong, and that's it. The gameplay that Hairbrush encourages is zoning a survivor to the bad side of the pallet and downing them immediately. It's extremely silly. The one and only counterplay to this add-on, and honestly, Michael as a whole, is just running to pallets and pre-dropping them, because if you don't do that, you're just dead. Unlike Clown, who has to actively stop and break the pallets and eventually reload, Myers forces you to pre-drop for 1 minute straight and then can force you into another minute of pre-dropping after a measly 6-second buffer. We all hate pre-dropping. Literally, nobody enjoys this gameplay. Survivor and Killer players both think it's extremely boring. The addition of another pre-drop heavy character just sucks. Before the buffs in October, Myers was still weak, but being weak and easy to play will always be healthier for the game than being strong and easy to play. Remember when Kaneki launched and was one of the most despised things in the game and had his reputation completely ruined? This one has a bit of an asterisk next to it, but has anyone been playing long enough to remember when Launch Legion came out and just about killed the game? What about Sadako's first rework? We've been shown over and over again that killers with extremely low skill floors just shouldn't be strong. While I was never in favor of this rework with the video proof uploaded on this very channel to prove it, I wanted it to succeed because it's Michael Myers, one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic horror character. He is fundamental to the early success of Dead by Daylight as a game. The Halloween chapter as a whole has offered some of the biggest hitters in this game's life cycle, in good and bad ways. You could argue that without Michael Myers, Dead by Daylight would have never blown up, and a lot of us might not even be playing it. There's a chance that people might not be playing it at all. Right, so what can be done to try and salvage this rework to make it more enjoyable for everybody? I've tried to be a bit conservative with these things. I don't think it needs a lot of changes, but there are some things that need to be addressed immediately. Despite how much I would like it to not be this way, this is the version of Myers we will more than likely have for a long time. There are a series of things that need to be changed as soon as possible before he leaves the community's eye fully and fades into the background. Give the man some animations for God's sakes. Literally all of the animations tied to this rework are just terrible and should have never been implemented like this. None of them look good visually, most of the sound cues are awful, it just seems so incredibly rushed, and people do notice these things. As for actual nerfs to try and bring this character back into the range where he should be, reduce Myers' movement speed to a flat 100% or 4.0 during the weird weapon inspect he does once he activates Evil Within. It was incredibly silly for Myers to actively lose distance when he popped his power pre-buffs, but it's just as silly for him to be gaining distance. Reducing this to 100% means that he will neither gain or lose distance. This would hopefully help with the frustrating situation where Myers pops a tier 3 and is able to just completely walk you down with nothing you can do to prevent it. Having Evil Within used on your back has always been one of the worst aspects of playing against Michael, and the 115% movement speed that he currently has does nothing but further encourage this from happening. The next change is to reduce his zoning strength. This would focus on his cooldown and the Hairbrush add-on specifically. His cooldown went from 6 seconds to 4 seconds. I would agree that 6 seconds was probably a bit long. However, it would be nice to try this at 5 seconds to see how it feels. This would very slightly reduce the spamming of the power while also keeping it pretty short for a cooldown compared to other powers. 5 seconds could potentially still be too strong or too weak, but it's attached to all the other buffs that he's received. So I do think testing out 5 seconds would be good. Finally, Hairbrush just needs an entirely different effect. It is extremely silly to attach this high of a number and this effect to an add-on. Myers already zones better than almost any other killer in the game. Giving him another tool to do so is straight up just a bad idea. This add-on could buff his pursuer mode or, literally anything else. It's a terrible design, do something else with it. This change is the one that I think might be the most controversial. I think you should move the required amount of time for stalking from 6 seconds to 8 seconds. This is a large change, but there's literally no moment in the match where Michael doesn't have his power right now. This would cause Myers to take a bit longer to gain his power, therefore giving survivors a chance to put a bit of a distance between them and him. As for the buffs to make Michael feel a little bit better, first, Pursuer mode just needs to be better. There is literally no reason to use this mode currently. You stalk survivors so fast that you can go from Stalker to Evil Within in literal seconds. Instead of buffing the numbers for Pursuer mode, I would suggest adding the speed buff to the pickup, drop, and hooking speeds of survivors. This would make the mode useful no matter what throughout the entire game, as well as just making the character feel better to play. It would also be nice quality of life to lower the cooldown for switching between stances to 1 second from the current 3 seconds. This would allow for Myers to pop in and out of Pursuer mode to kick pallets before moving back to Stalker mode mid-chase. The final buff I would like to see is the removal of the movement stalking penalty. It's just unneeded. At the end of the day, this is someone's favorite killer, so I am genuinely happy for the people who like this version of the killer, but I do think it's a genuine shame to stray away from the idea of making Michael into something unique in pursuit of him just being strong. This is just the opinion of one person, so don't take it too seriously. I really do doubt that I'm alone in really disliking the approach that Behavior took with changing Michael. Is he stronger? Yes. Is he a better design? Absolutely not. I do not think this is the last time we'll see Myers getting a rework, but until then, I think he is one of the most unfortunate designs in Dead by Daylight today. As fun as it can be to play as tall, insta-downing, easy mode pig. With all that said, my name is Kasir. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to catch the next one, join the Discord, check me out on Twitch. I hope I'll see you next time. Bye bye everyone.